So let's look at an example of creating a class level generic in Java. So I have got our Hello World project open and we have got our printer class here. And what I'm going to do here is I'm going to pretend like we want to make printer be able to have a type of print cartridge. So we want to have different types of printers. What we don't want to have is, or to do is to re-implement printer and make a printer call it black and white printer and another printer call it colored printer. Instead, it would be nice if we had a generic printer class and we specified when we created our printer whether we want it to be black and white printer or a colored printer, and then we could pass in to our constructor the print cartridge. And we could pass in a black and white print cartridge or colored print cartridge. So in order to do this, what we are going to do is we are just going to take our class definition of printer and we are going to change this so that it takes the type T. And this is going to be the type of printer. That will be either black and white or color or whatever kind of cartridge that we could come up with. And we will see some ways to restrict this later and while we will want to. But for now, it would just actually take any kind of type. Any type basically in Java besides of primitive type. So what we are going to do here is we want to hold a reference to whatever this type is. So we are going to use this. This is basically our mystery type and we can use this everywhere whenever we would declare the type. So in this example, we are going to want to pass in this type into the constructor so that we can store an instance of this type. We are going to, in this case, store our print cartridge. So we will call this cartridge. So we are going to start cartridge and then we need to have a class of a variable here. So I'm going to make a private of type T and I'm going to call this cartridge. Now you notice this type T here is the same as this T and this T. So whatever type is going to get fitted in here. So for example, let's say we had a color cartridge, then T would be represent color cartridge, and this is just like replacing color cartridge here and color cartridge here and color cartridge here. So let's assign this variable. We will do this dot cartridge equals cartridge. And so now we are storing a reference to whatever cartridge gets passed in. So let's look at the syntax real quick of how we would actually use this. So I will go to our main program here and let's change this a little bit. We had our machine example in here. So let's go to printer and in fact let's just declare this as a new printer here. So when we declare our printer type, we use these angle brackets to say what the type will be. And in this case, we are going to do something like a color cartridge. We haven't declared this type yet, but this is a type that we could use here. And we will call this printer. And then when we do our new printer, we do the same thing here. We say this is also a type of color cartridge, or printer of type color cartridge. So this printer is going to take color cartridges, and then in our constructor, we are going to pass in need to create a new color cartridge. And so you can see here, this is the kind of syntax that we are going to use here. We still need to create a class called color cartridge, but you can see that in order to use a generic class, we have specified what the type is. Because remember, in our class here, it's of type T. We don't know what type is, so when we actually use the class, we are specifying what the type is. And then that type is going to basically represent T for this instance of the class. Remember the difference between a class and an object. This object is going to get created and it has a type known. The class is generic. The class doesn't know what the type is until you create an instance of the object, and then it has the type defined here. This color cartridge in this example. So let's go ahead and create some classes that we'll be able to use here. I'm going to create two classes. I'm going to create a color cartridge and then I will create a black and white cartridge. And so now you can see our printer class, we have set this up to use a cartridge, and in our main here, we need to just import this color cartridge until we have got our import color cartridge type. So this compiles, this is fine here. I'm going to get rid of the machine references here. Now let's actually use this, and this is going to have a little bit of a limited use right now until we find a good way to use it. So we will go into our printer class, and what we are going to do here is we are going to use this cartridge, and we are just going to use this in a very simple way. When we call our print method here, if you remember this print method that prints a number of copies, the first thing that we are going to do is we are going to print out a toString on our cartridge. And this isn't going to really do much for us here, but just take a look here. I will do this print line, and we can look at our cartridge. And you can see the methods we can call on this, not very much, but we can only call methods that exist in object, since all types inherit from object. This is because our class has no way of knowing what type this is or what methods could exist on cartridge. So we are going to just use this toString method here, since all types, all objects have toString. And we are going to override toString in our color cartridge. So I will go into color cartridge, and if you remember how to do an override, we are going to do an override for public string toString. And toString is just a method that all classes have by default, because object has it that puts out a string. Usually you could override this to provide a string representation of your class. So we are going to return, for this, we are going to return color. So now if we call this, whatever cartridge that we get in, we are going to call the toString on it. And I will do the same thing for the black and white cartridge. And here we will return black and white. And so now let's go ahead and take a look at what we are going to do here on our main class here. We are going to create a printer of type color cartridge, and then we are going to pass in a new color cartridge into it, into our constructor. So now we have got a reference to our color cartridge. Then in our printer, we are going to print out whatever the cartridge just was. We are going to print out its string, the toString on it. So let's go ahead and call our copy, go printer.print, and then we'll print one copy. So let's see what we get here. As you can see here, we have printed out color and then the load more paper from before. Now if I change this, I could change this to a type of BW cartridge, and I can put BW cartridge here, and now we have got a black and white cartridge. So now if I run this now, you can see it's printed BW for black and white. Now typically we will do more with our type here, but in this case we are making it so that we can have a printer that accepts multiple types. It can be typed when we create our printer. And the funny thing that you will find here is this isn't really useful yet. Now if we are creating some kind of collection where we are holding a lot of different cartridges, and they all need to be able to be the same type, and we kept on adding them to the printer and then getting them back out, then this would be very, very useful using generics here. But what you will find is, as we restrict the generics, and I'm going to show you how to do that in a little bit later, but then we will actually be able to get some really good use out of this. And the reason why we are not able to get much out of this yet is because we can only call so many methods on the cartridge. We can only call the methods that are common to object.